agenda is the approval of the minutes from the October 17th meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve? Mike, do I hear a second?
Second.
Dan, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meetings are, minutes are approved. The next is a public hearing. We have a request. Ron Little has applied for a conditional use permit on a property containing approximately .94 acres located at 117 West Lexington Avenue, Danville. The property is zoned general residential. Steve?
Yep, thank you. Should have that staff report in your packet. And there's items on the screen, it's more for the public. I think everything that'll be up on the screen for both cases should be in your packet, but obviously there's a bigger shot right behind you guys if you want to look at it. So again, we had an application filed on October 31st, 2019. You heard the applicant is Brian and Ramona Little. They're the applicant and the property owners, and that's that 117 address that you see on the aerial right there. And interesting enough, there's other addresses kind of in this general location. And really what's going on here is there's been a facility already in operation at this property, bed and breakfast, short-term rental, whatever you want to call it. And knowing that the zoning ordinance is close to being revised and there's going to be specific processes related to short-term rentals and bed and breakfasts, and there's going to be a lot of text revisions, Mr. Little's desire was to come in and get a conditional use permit now. He does comply with the rules after the fact. But his desire was to get an approval now to sort of iron everything out and make sure he's in compliance with the rules moving forward. So this is a zoomed in shot of the property, a little closer shot of the house. And let me get to the zoning map here. You can see it's zone GRA. It's this property right here, which is our large lot residential. And that's a zoomed in picture. And again, the best photo really is this one here of the property. So there's already some units that are being used for short-term rentals, for example, or bed and breakfast, and pretty much similar to a case that we had last month. Again, the applicant's desire is to get it approved under kind of the old rules. The new rules were kind of gray right now. The city still hasn't acted on the new zoning ordinance. There's been a lot of discussion how Airbnbs or short-term rentals are going to function into the future. So he wanted to get his facility approved. So page 2 of your staff report outlines what we have in the zoning ordinance today. And under the GRA or large lot residential, all we use is the term bed and breakfast. We have no verbiage in our current Article 5 that relates to short-term rentals or Airbnbs or whatever industry term someone wants to use. We just say the word bed and breakfast. The bottom of page 3, we do have some defined terms related to bed and breakfast, homes, inns, and short-term rentals, but there's no standards or rules related to parking or setbacks or uses at this time. It just says a bed and breakfast requires a conditional use permit, and that's what the applicant is applying for, to get this property at 117 West Lexington approved to do what basically is on the property right now as a short-term rental. So you guys don't have the new language in front of you because it hasn't been adopted, but the main thing we're looking at with the new language is parking, and I think we talked about that last month with the applicant. And they do have the parking. And to take it a step further, page 4 of your staff report, as you all know, in a conditional use permit, you guys can attach conditions, or the applicants can self-impose conditions to be discussed at the meeting. The applicant has put 4 conditions with this, and it says it's limited to 4 people. All parking will be on site in its current location or where they do this currently, signage in place, and they basically only provide snacks and breakfast items only. So again, that's what the applicant's put forward as his standards for this short-term rental, bed and breakfast, whatever you want to call it. And then, of course, your review criteria is on page 5. There were no staff items of concern. Again, very similar to the case we heard last month. This is a low-impact style. We have all kinds of Airbnbs happening out in the county and in the city. This would fall under a definition of a hosted. Again, the property owner lives on the property, lives on site, rents some rooms. And again, we don't know much about it. It functions very well, but under the new rules, there'd be some slight deviations on some things depending on which direction the city goes. And one of those options is the city could choose not to allow them in residential districts. I think they're heading towards to allowing them in residential zones where the county's taking a whole different approach. So at this point, our ordinance allows for a bed and breakfast to be considered, and it's there. It would be grandfathered in if the rules change tomorrow. It would be grandfathered in, but they want to get it approved under the current ordinance to make sure they can go forward into the future at this scale.
Any questions for Steve?
Are there multiple buildings on this lot?
I'd have-
Does that have an impact on
I think,
how our future regulations?
no.
If you have multiple buildings on a property?
No, I'll let Mr. Little talk about his facility, but for the future ordinance, the way we do this, the Airbnbs or bed and breakfasts can be attached, detached, subordinate structures. They're very, very loose on how we do those into the future. We're not specific on those. Even the current bed and breakfasts, you know, there may be a guest house or cottage house or garage apartment. They're done different ways, and applicants really set that scale. It is relevant on the building square footage, though, because we have caps on the district on how big the buildings can be. So if someone wanted to do something detached, there's still caps on accessory buildings in general. But we don't regulate the use on the property being in the main house or big house versus the accessory house. So and again, I believe he's here, and he can tell you a little bit more about his facility and the buildings, because again, it's a pretty heavy tree cover back there, and it is kind of hard to see the site in good detail.
Okay, any other questions for Steve? If not, Mr. Little, would you raise your right hand? Do you swear and affirm the statement you're about to make are true and correct?
I do.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Little?
Let me describe the
Mine
property.
got answered.
Okay, yeah, so it's a carriage house, it's detached, and we've been renting that for over 5 years without any issues, so I think that's important to note as well. We have been doing that, operating, but it sits, of course, we've got 4 kids there, and it sits, I don't know, 20 yards off of my house, and so their front yard is our backyard, so.
You haven't had any problems with noise or,
No, we don't, and we're very careful in that process as far as, again, we're raising 4 small children there, so very selective in that process.
won't be a change in ingress or egress, your water supply, city water,
No,
sewer services,
no change.
trash pickup? Yeah. Any other? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Do we know if anyone is opposed?
Well, yeah, I can ask, is anyone opposed to this? Yes, ma'am, sorry. Yes, come to the podium, please. Raise your right hand. State your name.
Ann Ferguson,
And do you swear and affirm the statements you're about to make are true and correct?
yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Really, I just have a question. Will all the short-term rentals existing now be grandfathered in? I had heard to the contrary, but the director has indicated that the ones that exist now will be grandfathered in under the new regulations. That's my question.
Steve?
Yeah, I'll answer it. And the answer is I can't tell you right now because all 4 governments are taking different approaches to the future rules.
Right.
So let's use the county, for example. They've decided they're not going to allow them in single-family zones and make them conditional in ag. So if there's one out there right now that's approved as a bed and breakfast or short-term rental, and they're not 100% in compliance with the rule, and they're in an ag district, I'd say it's grandfathered in. It's non-conforming. If there's one in the single-family zone and we don't allow it in the future, it's probably not going to be grandfathered in, depending on the scale and the day it was started, either as a bed and breakfast or short-term rental. We're just going to have to figure these out one by one. The city's leaning towards, I've been told, to allowing them in single-family zones by condition. So if there's one out there and it doesn't have a conditional use permit, you could argue it's grandfathered in or non-conforming, but it's more difficult than that because there's 11 rules that go with the standards. So it may be The CUP's the issue, maybe not. Maybe the parking's an issue, maybe not. Maybe they don't meet the parking or the buffering requirement. So we're not gonna know that answer till we look at each individual one and figure out what zoning district it's in, whether it be ag, GRA, GRB, NCC, commercial. Everyone is different. Everyone now has 11 different rules to meet, and they have a place and time that they're either approved and grandfathered in or they're not. So we can't answer that very effectively right now. This particular one is in, again, is in a GRA zone, which in the county would not be allowed in the future, but the city's gonna allow it. So the easiest, this one would probably be grandfathered in under the new rules. As a bed and breakfast, it's different than as an Airbnb. Those are two sets of different rules and actually two different uses under our proposed ordinance in the future.
But am I right that our decision on this one today would not apply or grandfather in any other property?
No,
Not any
No.
other properties. but
just,
Just this one?
and this one makes it legal under the current terms of the ordinance if the CUP is approved. And there's some state law about prior violations under the terms of the ordinance and whether they become CUPs at some point in time. There's also language in the state law that if there's a violation that exists for 10 years and it's not part of any adverse action, it becomes non-conforming by default. So, you know, the whole issue is here, do we have violations or not with the current uses? We're not gonna know that till we look at each particular use, each particular site, and determine what day it went online, what style, did it meet the parking, and we really need the new rules in place before we can make any of those determinations at that point in time.
Do we have a motion on the table?
Well, he had a question, so, yes, we do
Second.
have, I will take a motion.
Second. I thought you liked one.
I'm sorry?
I thought you liked one.
No, I didn't make one, but I will entertain a motion if someone wants to make a motion.
I make a motion to approve the conditional use permit for a bed and breakfast at 117 West Lexington Avenue, based on the findings of the facts and evidence that it does not create any problems or issues.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is for the Parksville Baptist Church and Kentucky Lodging and Development Company has applied for a variance on a property containing approximately 1.185 acres located at 695 Alum Springs Rd, Danville, Kentucky. The property is zoned rural commercial. Steve?
Yes, ma'am. So the aerial's up there behind you guys again. We got several slides, not many really, but you can see the property. That's just the raw aerial, and there's the zoning. So I'll work off your staff report again. That zoning, that RC, is what we call rural commercial. It's not a zoning we see a lot of. It's out in the county. There's remnants of it all over the county. So the terms you're seeing, GRB is our small lot residential, RC is our rural commercial. You see the right-of-ways and road center lines, the PVA parcels, and again, a lot of that stuff is not survey grade that you're looking at there, so that's why you see some deviations in the aerials and some of the zoning lines. But in general, you can see the rural commercial zoning and the streets that we're dealing with. So I'll, again, and then we've got this is a backed up shot. It's hard to see, but we got rural commercial way down here too, and here, and just scatterings around in different places, as well as residential zoning. And then interesting enough, the agricultural zoning is kind of way out on the perimeter of this kind of node in the county here. So we'll start with that. So page 1 of your staff report, again, we got an application filed on October 31st, 2019. The applicant is actually Kentucky Lodging and Development Company, Inc. That is your actual applicant. The property owner, as you heard, is the Parksville Baptist Church. The location of the property is 6595 Alum Springs Road. That address is fairly new. You're not seeing it on the GIS layer because the applicants went to the emergency management folks to get an address. This had a 0 address historically on it as an undeveloped piece of property. The property size is 1.185 acres. The current zoning, as I mentioned, is rural commercial, and the existing land use is vacant. And again, the applicant is asking for a dimensional variance for a front setback along the Mill Road. And let me explain that real quick. This is a unique situation to some degree. You got roads on all sides of this property. This is 34, Alum Springs, Mill Road, and you see the Cemetery Road that circles on around here. So this property is completely surrounded by roads. And here's your site layout for the property. So this is the building that's being proposed. No secret at this point, it's talked about it being a dollar store. So you see the building and the parking. This is the front of the building, and you know, if you're not using the zoning ordinance every day, and you think about what's the front, what's the rear, what's the side, well, it doesn't necessarily correlate to what actually happens. This is the front, and these would be the sides, and you could say this is the rear or call something else the rear, but what the zoning ordinance says that when you're along multiple roadways, everything's a front setback. So this is the front, this is the front, this is the front, and this is the front. So the applicant has to meet the front setback requirements on all sides of this building, whether it's a side or rear, under the zoning ordinance verbiage. It's hard for some folks to kind of grasp that, because they look at a building and say, well, what is the front? And that must be the front yard setback. That's not accurate. When there's other right-of-ways, you get multiple front yard setbacks. Now, it's unique to me because I've, I guess, never seen 4 front yard setbacks. I've seen 3, and I see 2 all the time in subdivisions. On a corner lot, you get 2 fronts. Cattleman's is a good example of having 3 fronts with 3 roadways, but it's very rare that you see a piece of property totally surrounded by 4 roadways. That's why the need for 4 front setbacks. So we communicated to the applicant that they have to meet 4 front setbacks, which are 20 foot in the rural commercial. And obviously they have a fairly deep setback on what was truly the front of the building. They meet the 20 on this side, they meet the 20 on this side, they meet the 20 here. Where they don't meet it is right here in this corner. And therefore, they're requesting a 16-foot variance of that 20-foot requirement, which puts the corner of this building exactly at 4 foot from the right-of-way. And as you move this way, obviously that 4 foot's increasing because of the shape of the right-of-way. So at some point, they meet the 20 foot, but they don't meet it in the back corner of what technically is the side of the building. If you were looking at the building in the true sense, they don't meet it in this corner. So that's what we're focused on here today, is the variance request for a building in a commercial zone that can't meet a front setback at the back corner of the building. So all that, I sort of jumped ahead of myself, is sort of laid out on page 2 of your staff report. We talk about the rural commercial zones. The front setback is 20. Interesting enough, the side setback is 4 foot. If it was a side, it's actually not in this situation, and then the rear is 20. So that's on page 2 of your staff report. The terms I put in there were just more for information purposes. What is a corner lot? What is a setback? What is a front yard, rear yard, or side yard? And it's interesting, the front setback says a space extending the full width of the lot between any building and the front, and it goes on. In the case of corner or through lots, front yard shall be provided on all frontages. So that's what's unique about this situation, is we've got roads on all 4 sides of a development site plan. And I do want to point out, this is already zoned commercial, as I pointed out on the map. So this isn't a zone change hearing. There's been a lot of folks call and ask us about stuff that, if it was a zone change hearing or a conditional use or a site plan case, we talk about other things, but this is a variance request. And so the focus we were focused on is where the variance is occurring on the property, and then the rules you guys have for reviewing and considering variances, which are different than conditional use permits, as you guys know. So page 3 of your staff report talks exactly about that, the review criteria and findings that you all have when you're looking at a variance. You guys know you can always impose conditions on variances as well as conditional use permits like the prior case. There were no specific staff items of concern. And then the statute, KRS 100, 241 and 243, lay out again that you guys can impose variances on conditions on variance requests, and that the findings necessary to grant a variance are slightly different than what you just considered under a conditional use permit. And I think they're spelled out there on those 2 pages. And again, we've got our cookie cutter motion up or down on the last page. I'll be glad to answer any questions related to the the variance requests or anything you guys might have for me, I believe the applicants are here and have counsel, and I believe there's several neighbors here that have questions and concerns, and there may be some other attorneys in the audience that represent other parties. We fielded a lot of calls about the property and what's happening, and again, all we have, you know, in front of us, the staff, and now in front of you, is a variance request to go from 20 foot to 4 foot on that one side of the building, again, right in this location on the Mill Road side. And I'd be glad to answer any questions you guys might have of me, and I'll be glad to put any slides up you guys want. I think that's everything I have.
Any questions for Steve right now? Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'm familiar with the location. There's very deep ditches on two sides of that property with increased foot traffic and pedestrian traffic. Is there anything in the plan to address possible safety concerns?
That may need to come from,
Yeah, the applicants might want to address that. As far as what we were
Right.
considering, and just to be fair, the parking's up there too, the building layout, all these landscape things, these really aren't party to the variance request. I think the applicant gave us a full layout so the board could see the septic system, the loading areas, the parking, the access, but the focus is the variance at that corner. Interesting enough, all the technical details related to landscape, parking, building, orientation, all that are in compliance with the zoning ordinance, other than the corner of the building that doesn't meet the 20-foot setback. Everything else that you see on that plan is spot on with the zoning ordinance, except that the building cannot exist without a variance, without re-engineering the whole site or swapping things around to meet the setbacks. But so we wouldn't have looked at anything like that under the zoning ordinance related to the ditches.
and it wouldn't be considered in the setback.
Now, we would, the drainage area for the property is shown up here, and ditches that might be in the right-of-way or along the roadways would not be something we'd be looking at in a variance request.
So I understand you to say we may not consider safety concern?
I'll let the,
You may consider safety concern as regards that corner for which they're seeking the variance. More broadly on the site, safety is not a question that's being asked before the board. It's with regard to that particular item, which is the subject of the variance.
Another question with respect to stormwater drainage and sanitary sewer, that sewerage. Has that been considered, and is the proposed plan satisfactory on those regards?
we don't have hard plans yet, because again, the applicant's at the variance request stage, you know, they gotta see if that's successful before they can go on and apply for a permit. It would not be on sanitary sewer. We're well outside the sanitary sewer footprint. They are showing a septic system. It's labeled right here on the exhibit. And so the plan is to put it on sanitary or a septic system, and their communication with the health department would be something that we're not party to. We normally just know if it's going to be on sewer or be on a septic field, and that's something the applicants can tell you about. It is also not something we would review in a variance request, but it would be more typical in a zone change or a site plan review, which this one is exempt from too.
Another question. When I looked at the sketch, it wasn't clear to me whether what is behind the building, is that what we would consider a parking lot, or is that a new driveway? Is that a new street?
I'll let the applicants describe what they're showing. This is their loading area, obviously. It's sort of labeled on here, and this
But
is, these
it
are.
accesses both sides.
It
with
accesses
stop
both
lines
sides.
and
Obviously,
signage.
there's no parking spaces, so it looks to me, again, and as a loading area with access to both streets to allow, and there's trash too. So obviously, trash trucks have to get in, as well as loading for the facility where the traditional customer parking's in the front. So it's obviously a loading, unloading area with access points to both streets, north and south.
And stop signs, and a stop stripe, which makes me imagine it as a roadway.
It's not a roadway. It'd have to be platted and as a roadway and bonded. It's not a roadway. It's a driveway through the two streets. That's, again, not maybe to Danville, and I'll let the applicants describe it. There are some businesses you pull out of that put stop signs in stop striping, Walmart's, for example. Some of that's a street, some of that's a parking lot. It's not consistent that the stop signs or the striping indicate that's a public
That
right-of-way.
doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
define it as a.
But it's a nice amenity to let drivers know that, you know, you just don't pull out of a driveway like your house and go out under the street. Putting a stop bar and stop sign out of a commercial business, I think is just good kind of idea for your customers and vehicles to make sure they stop and look. But it's not a requirement in our zoning ordinance that have traffic controls like that in and out of the driveway cuts.
Okay. Any
And
other
going back to
questions
the
for-
original, it does meet the zoning ordinance as far as the zoning district, the setbacks, other than that corner, the parking, all the things that it would be in compliance, other than the setback along the Mill Road side.
Any questions for Steve, anyone else? Okay, let me explain something. This is a request for a variance. We have attorneys, as I understand it, representing both sides, and maybe some of you as individuals. We will hear testimony regarding the variance, questions you have about it. Nothing else will we listen to. Saying, I want it, I don't want it, I don't care. I mean, I don't mean to sound rude, but we can only consider comments regarding the variance. To that degree. Who's the attorney representing the applicants?
I am
Okay.
Stephen Dexter for the applicants. May I proceed?
You may proceed.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I do have just to submit for the record in written format my presentation before you. If I can hand those out now.
Sure.
Just so you have them, but I'm not going to read it to you.
Thank you.
Your director did a good job of setting up the request that is before you, so I'm not going to regurgitate those same details. However, I would like to reiterate the unique set of circumstances that do surround this particular parcel in Parksville. The applicant has the unique challenge of fitting a 9,100 square foot retail business structure into an area with adequate parking, meeting 4 front yard setbacks in a somewhat triangular piece property that tapers significantly to the east. And additionally, there are more than adequate setbacks from Lebanon Road, Alum Springs Road, and Cemetery Road. However, the small section of Mill Road in which right-of-way or setbacks would be infringed, as currently stated, are what's before you. So if the north side of the structure were considered a side setback, which we can, from a lay perspective, that's what it is. From a technical perspective, it's considered a front yard under the ordinance. But from a lay perspective, as a side setback, it would meet the requirements. However, due to the technical language of the ordinance, it is considered a front yard setback, so that is why the application is being made to you today for this variance. And again, in order to have findings substantial enough to support a variance, that KRS 100-243 is applicable. Your director outlined it for you. It's attached to my statement and submitted to the record as well. And so my presentation, essentially, the rest of it will focus on the statutory compliance that is required of you and the applicant to seek it and provide justification as to why it should, in fact, be approved. So the statute requires that the granting of the variance will not adversely affect the public health, safety, or welfare. And I'm articulating to you that it is consistent with the zoning regulations in place as a rural commercial zone and is permitted by right, not condition, but permitted by right. So a use permitted by right on its very face cannot adversely affect public health, safety, or welfare. It has been approved by the public bodies in charge of setting the zoning designations as an appropriate place for rural commercial business. Moreover, the setbacks on 3 of the 4 sides are more than sufficient to address any public safety concerns. 2, granting of the variance will not alter the character of the general vicinity. Again, since the property is zoned rural commercial, the proposed use is by regulation within the same character of its location. And you could see from the previous map, there were spotted rural commercial zones in the area. So this is not a one unique spot. It's scattered throughout this kind of what we can call the kind of central Parksville district. And I would argue that there's no more appropriate place in Parksville for a commercial development of this size. In fact, other locations had been studied, but in order to provide the best services to this area of the county, this parcel in question seems to be the most appropriate. In fact, it's the only parcel in Parksville that's large enough for the proposed use and appropriately zoned. 3, granting of the variance will not cause a hazard or nuisance to the public. The variance, again, is sought merely for this particular corner closest to Mill Road, and it would meet the typical side setbacks of 4 feet and is considered non-hazardous if it was in another setting. So it is technically a front yard, as we discussed. However, it's hard to argue that a typical side setback would cause a hazard or a nuisance. 4, granting of the variance will not allow an unreasonable circumvention of the zoning regulations. Due to the special circumstances we described, its location, its size, its shape, and the fact that it's properly zoned for the proposed permitted use, there's not an attempt by the applicant to circumvent any zoning regulations or setback requirements here. The granting of the variance is simply necessitated by these special circumstances that typically don't apply to any other parcels of this kind. So the fact that it's a commercially zoned property has to have 4 front yard setbacks, as noted by your director, is highly unique. There is no other parcel in Boyle County that has this same requirement. Zip, zero, nada. And I would find it a challenge in a lot of communities, developed communities of counties of our size in a comparison, that would have a parcel like this one. It's highly unique. What makes it further unique, again, is the shape, how it tapers significantly as you go east. Again, no other property in Boyle County has ever had to make a commercial development with 4 front yard setbacks. The building is designed, as shown, to be the best and most reasonable position for this size of retail business and the parking required. To alter the position of the structure would require additional road frontage along Mill Road, which would be far from desirable and practical from an aesthetic point of view, as it would require significant additional retainage walls and plans that, from an aesthetic standpoint, probably would not be desirable to those in the area. Point 6, and it's my final point. Granting the variance protects the applicant from being deprived of its best and most reasonable use of the property and prevents a hardship from being inflicted. Again, this parcel is the most practical use for the purpose developed and proposed. Its size and location and zone all prove that point, and it's permitted by right. The unique shape and odd requirement of having 4 separate road setbacks is quite a challenge. Meeting 3 of them was doable, and the site plan was designed purposefully to make as small an impact as possible on Mill Road. But in order to achieve that result, there's a small variance needed, and failure to grant it does in fact create a hardship for the applicant, but not just the applicant, any potential developer of this property in this rural commercial zone would have the same problem that's being presented to you today. And it's for all of those reasons that the applicant respectfully requests and thinks justifies the granting of a variance today on the side setback requirement on Mill Road, as stated on its application. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have at this time, or defer to the chair for further instruction.
Any questions? Is there anyone here who wants to speak for approving the variance? Okay. Is there anyone, raise your hands. Everybody that wants to speak for approving the variance. Raise your hand. Okay. I'll start over here with this gentleman. He's the first one that I saw. Mr. Dexter, we may want to.
Thank you. I was going to ask if I could reserve some time for concluding comments after other
Yeah.
comments are made
Yeah.
for the applicant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Please, oh, up here. State your name, please,
My name is Bo Cacciatore.
and raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm the statements you're about to make are true and correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead, sir. Addressing only the variance issue.
Yes, I just want to say I own the Farmhouse Restaurant down in Parksville, and our setback, we're pre-existing non-conforming. We do not meet the 20-foot setback. There is zero safety issue with it, and I feel like, you know, I don't have any objection to this.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. If you'd come to the podium, please. Your name,
Darrell Taylor,
and raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm the statements you're about to make are true and correct?
yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
I have very little to say other than the fact that I would hope that this would be approved because it would be a great help to all these people that's east, west.
Sir, we need you to address only the setback, nothing else. Not
Well,
whether it
that-
be good, bad,
Okay.
but just the
That is
setback.
the reason I think it should be approved, because of so many people in that area that has no place to go buy groceries and
Okay,
stuff.
thank you,
So
sir.
that's all I have to say.
Thank you. I saw some more hands over here. Anyone else would like to address the setback issue? Okay. If not, I think the opposition also has an attorney here.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the board. I appreciate your time. My name is Brian Bailey. I am here representing Jeff and Dana Lawhorn. And if I could, I did not bother to type out my comments for you, but I did bring some pictures to help give us a little bit of perspective of the issue with the variance. And this is specifically about the variance, which happens to run along Mill Road. If I could, these are for the board to take a look at. Those are pictures of Mill Road. One of the things that we can't tell from the drawing nor from the aerial photograph is Mill Road is only 12 feet wide. It is a single lane road. All the other roads surrounding this property are double lane roads, which are at least 30-foot wide. Here's why this setback presents a problem, or why this variance would present a problem. We are 4 feet from the right-of-way, which means that we're 17 feet from the edge of Mill Road. The way this appears from the site plan is semi-truck trailers can come in either way from any direction. Here's the problem we have with a semi-truck trailer trying to turn in off of Mill Road. The minimum turn radius for a semi is, and I'm gonna have to look at my notes, but I believe it is 13 meters. If we go from the outside for the turn radius. Nope, I'm sorry, I apologize on that. It is actually, I am correct. It's 13.72 meters, which is about 39 feet. Here's the problem that we have with this setback. 17 feet from the corner of the building to the side of the road. Another 12 feet across the road is only 29 feet, which puts us at about 8 meters. We're about 5 meters short for a semi to be able to turn into this from off of Mill Road into the loading zone back there. Here's the problem, and here's my client's concern. What is going to happen with that other 5 meters? The reality is the outside radius of any truck turning into this road is going to either scrape the back of the building or end up in my client's front yard. Which, and I understand that this board could actually could grant a variance all the way up to the right-of-way, but the problem we have here is not so much that it's zoned. We all know it's zoned rural commercial. We all know that the dollar store can put something in there. The problem is the space. As you can see from the pictures, by the way, a semi, because I did a little bit of checking this morning, the average width of a semi is 8.5 feet. So if a semi runs into another car on Mill Road, the average width of the car is 6 feet. We are, again, about 1.5 feet short. And as was mentioned earlier, there are some pretty serious ditches. While they're not very wide, they are very deep, right along Mill Road. So now we end up with a car in a ditch, or we end up with a semi in a ditch, or we end up with some other issues. The reality is, the problem here with the setback they're asking for is it does present some issues. It could present some safety issues. There's a child that lives in the house across the street. You can see from the chalk drawings on the road there that right now it's safe because there's very little traffic up and down that road. The semis running up and down that road, it would be difficult, especially if a semi were to come in from Alum Springs there, or 300, and try to turn right to go out. With a 4-foot setback, it's going to be very difficult for a semi turning left out of the back of the dollar store to see who's coming down the road and who's on the street. The other thing is, with all due respect, they could meet the setback requirements on all 4 frontages. They would have to shift the building, they would have to shift the parking lot. It would cost them some added expense, no argument there, but it could be done. A variance is to be granted when to deny it would deny the applicant of use of the property. Denying this variance isn't going to deny them use of the property, they're just going to have to make some changes. Does the board have any questions?
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
How many semis do you anticipate will be coming in and out of there in a time frame?
Well, that is a wonderful question that I don't know the answer to, but I do know this, just anecdotally. I have a stepdaughter that works for the dollar store. It's a good company. They've treated her very well. During the holiday season, they're probably getting at least one a week, one a day. During regular times, if they sell groceries, it's more often because they have to have them at least 2 or 3 times a week for the milk and the fresh stuff. Are we talking semis running in all day, every day? I doubt that. But the issue is we're probably talking at least 2 or 3 times a week, maybe once a day during the busy seasons. And I'm speculating. That would actually be a question for the dollar store because I don't know how much they do. And I do know this, that I seldom see box trucks, although box trucks are wide too. I seldom see a box truck at a dollar store unless it's somebody delivering bread or something along those lines. And generally, it's their merchandise comes on a 53-foot tractor trailer.
Any other questions for Mr. Bailey?
Is there an entrance from the other side?
It appears that they're going to put an entrance on both sides. It does appear that way. The problem, the way we see it as it is now, the dollar store can't control and I don't know, again, I'm speculating, but I'm assuming that some of these drivers of these trucks are probably operator owners, and some may be employed by the dollar store. I don't know, there'd be a question for them. But the concern is once the variance is granted, once the building's built, and with all due respect to the truck driver, if we get a rogue truck driver that decides to use that way, I don't know that there's anything the dollar store can do to control it. And then we have the issue to deal with my client having a semi-truck in his front yard. So I don't mean not to answer your question, I'm just not sure I know the answer. To unless the dollar store just doesn't have ingress or egress off of Mill Road. I suppose if they didn't have ingress or egress off of Mill Road, that would probably address our concerns, but it might create other concerns for the dollar store that I'm not aware of.
Any other questions for Mr. Bailey? Okay, who would like to speak against this application? I'd like for you to raise your hand if you would. Okay, ma'am? Remember that we need to address only the variance. State your name
My name is Dana Lawhorn, and I reside at 44 Mill Road.
and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the statements you're about to make are true and correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
We make the points of the 3 points that they have to go by. Safety, does it change the culture? All of those things that he addressed. Safety is a concern for me. This is much more, and I know I can't discuss it, I'm not going to, but it's personal for me. That house is personal for me. Safety is a concern for me because you're putting trucks on a road that was never designed to hold big trucks. It was designed back when the mill was there many, 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 many years ago. It is not designed to have a semi come up a one-lane road. Now, safety for me is when I have to leave my drive and have to pass a car. I'm either going to put a car in that ditch line or I have to go in my yard, which is safety for me in my yard because it keeps ruts. And if I have to have semis on this road, yes, my grandson plays there. My son played there. But I know I got to keep him off the road. I'm a responsible grandmother. I get that. But you're going to have traffic all the time on that road. It's going to become a safety issue because the people who reside in Parksville are going to understand you've got new entrances going to come. If you know the corner where the post office is, it's a safety concern because it's a bad corner. So the people who live in Parksville are going to come into Parksville, oh, I'm going to miss that corner. I'm going to take Mill Road and loop around to 300. The same with 300, going to loop through Mill Road and take Lebanon Road because they're going to want to avoid the congestion that's going to happen around that corner where the post office is. There's wrecks there all the time. So that's a huge safety as one of the parts that you had to look at. The other part, and I'm not a great speaker, so sorry, but the other part was the character. How do you not change the character of my 44 Mill Road by allowing that store to be closer to me? You're looking at 30-some feet from where I sit on my front porch at nighttime. 30-some feet from me. That's a huge character change by allowing that to happen. They can build their store, build it, put it in the guidelines that was established back a long time ago when that road was designed for very little traffic. Build it, welcome. Let the church have the dollar store. Let them sell it to them. Not against, I can't stop that. You can't stop that. But I can ask you to please not allow this change. Not allow them to be able to access a little one-lane road that you can barely pass on. So all I'm asking is for you to do that. And my last point would be the nuisance. That's part of it. That's a big nuisance when your front window is 30 feet from a store, from trucks coming and going up till 8:30 at night, 9 o'clock from what I've been told from other Dollar Generals around me. That's a nuisance for me. I love the quietness. I'm close to my son when I'm outside on that front porch and it's dark. It's a nuisance for me when you put bright lights. That's a safety for me. I'm home alone every night. I don't need that in my front door like that. That's my nuisance part of it. And I'm going to go back is to ask you just remember one thing. You are driven by a single goal, to do your part at making Bull County a better place to live. I know you don't care about my property value. I know it's going to affect that, and I have to live with that because I choose to live there. But all I'm asking is not to allow this to happen. Keep my road safe. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The gentleman that was sitting beside of you, do you wish to speak, sir?
Yes.
State your name.
Jeff Lawhorn. I reside.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm the statements you're about to make are true and correct?
Yes. I'm Jeff Lawhorn. I live at 44 Mill Road, and I'm just here to back my wife. Everything she said is true. In order for them to bring the trucks in and out, if it's a big box van, if it's a semi-trailer, whatever it is, they're gonna actually have to come over into our yard to make that turn. So regardless of the fact, I mean, this is about the variance, I mean, there's other issues I could actually bring up. If they want to store, fine, make it smaller, do whatever you have to. If they want, if the church wants to sell it to them, that's great. But in order for them to make that turn, they're actually gonna have to take almost half of my front yard to be able to get those trucks in there. And that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else? Yes, sir. Your name?
Joe York.
And Mr. York, raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the statements you're about to make are true and correct?
I certainly do.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
I would just like to address the truck traffic. I worked for 19 years for General Cable in the distribution center. We dealt with big trucks coming in and out all day long. In a perfect world, they arrive on time, they're safe, they all speak English. In reality, for 19 years, we tried to set up appointments. Could hardly ever get them to meet the appointments. In reality, the store has its own schedule, but the truck drivers have their schedules too. If they're in a hurry to get someplace after they make a stop, chances are they're gonna arrive at this store early, be there before it opens. Truck drivers rely on GPS, but to be honest with you, even given directions, a lot of times they struggle to follow the directions. When truck drivers come down 34 or 300, they're gonna see the store. The first road they're gonna see from those two directions is Mill Road. And I can just tell you, in dealing with them over the years from a safety standpoint, that a tractor trailer can take out the whole side of a vehicle and not even know they've done it. We had guys arrive, coming from Richmond delivering products that had sideswiped cars and didn't know they'd done it until somebody stopped them. And I'm not saying this is a scare tactic, it's just reality. I mean, that's what we're dealing with on the road today. And that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Your name?
If you all can look at this picture.
Oh, your name,
again.
ma'am?
Oh, I'm sorry. Peggy Arnold.
And raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the statements you're about to make are true and correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
You see Mill Road, almost directly across from it is my drive going up the hill. Very few people use Mill Road right now. Any variance that allows a building to sit and trucks to come in and out Mill Road, I have to take my life into my own hands now getting out on 34. Because right up the road where the post office is where the railroad used to be, and there's a crest there. People cannot see that Mill Road till they hit that crest, and a lot of them are doing 60 and 70 miles an hour, okay? When anybody turns out of my drive or Mill Road going either direction, you just about have to get in both lanes of the 34. And I see a disaster waiting to happen right there. And I feel like it's a big concern for my safety.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, any questions? If,
There's no representative of the applicant?
are there any other attorneys here or anyone else? I don't think so. Mr. Dexter?
The applicant is here. The applicant's engineers are here as well if technical questions are necessitated. However, I want to bring us full circle to the decision that's before you. There have been, substantial comments mostly that have surrounded the use of tractor-trailer traffic on Mill Road. I'd like to remind the board that whether or not the variance is granted, you cannot prevent tractor-trailer traffic on Mill Road. And even in the current setbacks, if a building was compliant, tractor-trailers would still be on Mill Road. So I can afford some, with that lens, I'd also like to provide this reassurance to the board, and that is that engineered studies have been completed and are on file and will be shared at appropriate times through the planning and zoning process and also in conjunction with the county engineer that model tractor trailers being able to enter from Alum Springs Road. There's a loading ramp on the back of the store, which is necessitated there, and then the flow is to turn right onto Mill Road towards Cemetery, which widens substantially, and circle that array around. So it would be the concept plan that trucks would enter Alum Springs Road, take a left to the back of the store, unload at the ramp, and then proceed to take a right on Mill Road towards Cemetery Road, and then exit back out Alum Springs Road. That is the engineered pathway. And again, I just want to remind you, regardless of the setback that's employed, any site plan is going to require access to Mill Road. And it's the county engineer's job to assess the appropriateness of that roadway for the traffic that will be there, and if additional conditions will be employed or imposed rather upon the developer at that time, that's where that transpires, but not at the variance stage. We're talking about issues 8, 9, and 10. There's not even formal building plans that have been proposed and submitted yet, because the first stage is the granting of the variance, or not, to determine which pathway the project takes. But again, the safety concerns of those that have spoken, I don't dispute. However, your decision today can't be contingent upon tractor-trailer traffic on Mill Road, but it can only be limited to the fact of how will tractor-trailer truck traffic be impacted versus having a 4-foot setback or a 20-foot setback. That is where the question to you is appropriate. Larger safety concerns are inappropriate, as astutely noted at the beginning of the hearing by your counsel.
Any questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Bailey, would you like to make a closing?
Like I said at the beginning, we understand it's zoned rural commercial. We understand the dollar store is going in there. And I understand that whether or not Mill Road can handle the tractor trailers is the county and engineer's job to determine. Our concern is the difference in a 17-foot, basically 17 foot from the roadway or 32 feet from the roadway. And once the store's up, once that corner is there at 17 feet, it is too late to do anything about any alleged safety issues for tractor trailers coming out of there. The other thing is, my degree is not in engineering, my degree was in law, but I would love to see the studies that say that a tractor trailer is going to be able to get up, turn right out of there and get up that road. It's quite a steep incline. I don't even think the fire department goes up and down that road. And there's a fire station house basically right at the end there. So once the variance is granted, once the building is up, it's too late for the safety issues. Then we have to play catch up.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you.
Thank you. State your name
Will Stevens, I'm with Vantage Engineering.
and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the statements you're about to make are true and correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead.
As I said, I'm with
Kind of
Vantage.
talk into the mic or pull it up, yeah.
I'm with Vantage Engineering, and I'm obviously the engineer for this project. And as many of the concerns relate to engineering, I just wanted to at least explain my thoughts. My degree is in engineering, so I just wanted to explain our thought process. When we lay out these sites, after we kind of have preliminary layout, I work with Dollar General Corporate with the primary concern of the truck movement. That's usually the most difficult part of the 2D layout of a site, is making sure that a truck can successfully maneuver the site. Dollar General has software that they use. When I send them my model, they model their truck movements with their software. And my understanding of the result of their analysis is that, as he said, the only part of Mill Road that we would use would be the part from the driveway to Cemetery Road as the truck circles around, which to me makes the placement of the building irrelevant to truck movements, which to me makes the truck movement argument irrelevant to the granting of a dimensional variance, because the truck will never be in danger of colliding with the store because the truck will be turning away from the store. Can you guys visualize the path that I'm describing there? So the truck will never come near the rear end of the store. It will be turning away from it. Another thing to consider, his charts are that he presented to you with the truck turning radii. Those are generally accepted and correct. The other thing to consider is that the truck wheel does not have to follow the edge of the radius of the road. It will swing out into the middle of the driveway, and I believe that is how we're justifying that the truck can make the movement. So any questions you guys have about the engineering aspects of it, I'd be glad to address as they relate to the dimensional variance.
Once again, rather than come down Mill Road, which is, I understand, a single lane road for all practical purposes, why not come in from the other side?
Come in from
34? From 34?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand. So how would the truck come in?
We've got 3 roads around there.
Mm-hmm.
Mill Road's a small lane coming down through there. If they drove quarter mile down the road and came in, I say 300, across the lower road down here, can't tell you that, isn't there enough room to get the trucks in from that side?
Yeah, do you have a laser pointer? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think I understand what you're asking, and I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page with what I'm describing. My understanding of Dollar General's approved truck movement for this site is the truck will be coming down 34. It will turn along Alum Springs, and it will come and turn in here, and then it will pull up. That right there is the delivery pad. So the rear end of the truck will end up right in there, and then it will come out here and turn this way and come around and back around. So is that what you were understanding?
That's what I was asking. Am I right? Someone said that from out on Mill Road, from that point on out here, is a wider road. Is that correct?
No, Mill Road is about the same width the entire way. Cemetery Road is a bit wider, and it actually even appears wider than it is because it's adjacent to that fire station's parking area. So there's a big slab of asphalt over here on the edge of my plan. But Mill Road is about, as he said, about 12 feet wide consistently throughout that. And I am working with Dwayne Campbell to get our entrances approved. That entrance specifically that ties into Mill Road because it's a county road. And he has not finished his review yet, and it's not really appropriate for him to finish it just yet because, as he's mentioned, the design at this point is in flux because it depends on what happens here. But he mentioned, I don't know exactly what he will approve, But he's mentioned things like we may have to overlay it with more asphalt, things like that, to make sure that it is suitable for trucks. But the point is that many of these concerns either have been or will be addressed during the design process. And, I take my role seriously, and I do not want a store to be built that is insufficient and will cause issues. So, I've taken great pains trying to make this work the best way that it can, and that's why we're presenting this layout. We feel like it is the best way to have a store in this location.
So what I'm understanding is that you're proposing that entrances go off of Alum Springs Road and exit on Mill Road?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And we could have that as a requirement, that we required that type of signage to be posted? That all entrances had to be made from Alum Springs Road?
For deliveries.
For deliveries,
Yes, sir.
right.
Yes, ma'am.
And in terms of the nuisance to the neighbors of having the building so close to their porch, is there no way to slide the building this way and have the parking spread around differently so that it's not so close?
The reason that we feel confident that the project will move forward regardless is that I have another possible way to do this. We did not present it that way because we feel like it's bad for my client as well as worse for the neighbors. And the reason for that is the alternative design. If you can visualize, the building, instead of being angled this way, the building would be angled facing more directly toward 34, and it would be shifted to this side closer to Mill Road. So the end effect would be that the entire side of the building would be almost exactly 20 feet from the road to meet the required setback. However, in that scenario, on average, the building will be closer to them. In this scenario, you have one corner that is insufficient, and once you get about a third of the way up the building to here, the entire rest of the building is compliant, and not only compliant, but exceeds the 20-foot setback. So we feel like this is the least intrusive way, even for the neighbors, to put the building in. The other design is also not desirable for us because it requires, as Stephen mentioned, much taller retaining walls up front, because we'll be onto a part of the site where it falls off more severely. So it presents other challenges that we don't want to have to deal with unless we have to.
Any other questions?
There's a gentleman behind there.
Oh, yes, sir. I didn't see him. Yes,
Do y'all have any questions?
stay up. Just- Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Mr. York, just to remind you that you're still sworn in, so.
Yes, I understand. How can you ensure that the trucks won't come in from 34? I mean, signage is a step in the right direction. I don't know how you ensure that when they come up 34, they don't try to make that turn into Mill Road from behind, or that if they're leaving the property, even with the sign, if their GPS is taking them toward Danville or someplace, that it doesn't take them down Mill Road.
That's a valid concern. David, am I right in saying that they have maps that the truck drivers are supposed to follow? Right. Yeah, I think they have established routes, so their established route should not be something that you guys don't approve them to do. But also signage, as David said, I think that you would, if you want to impose the restriction on the turns, I would propose putting signage not just at that entrance, but also at the end of Mill Road, because that's where it would.
Is it a one-way street? Is
I'm
Mill
sorry?
Road a one-way street?
It's a two-way road, but it's only one lane wide, much like many back roads in the county are. But my only answer is that you could put signage at the intersection of Mill Road and 34.
You could put no trucks
Right.
allowed, that type of thing.
Right.
But it is a two-way street.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Ms. Lawhorn, I think you need to come to the podium.
I just wanted to point out when they addressed that when you come out, you're gonna go right, not left out Mill Road. Well, if you've ever been to Parksville, you know where I'm talking about. If you go right, you have to go up a nice little incline, which puts you into where the fire department is. Part of that parking lot they're referring to is owned by the fire department, where the helicopters land when there's an emergency. So all that does not belong to the county. Part of that road's the county. Cemetery Street is still a one-lane road that goes up to the cemetery. The part they're referring to going back right to 300 is not all owned by the county. Some of that is owned by the fire department because they've got it marked off, no parking, because of the fire trucks. They have to keep that clear for the fire trucks. So that's not 100% all county road. There's a very small section of it that's county. The rest is the fire department because they've got it marked off.
Thank you.
Can I ask her?
Yeah, sure.
Could you talk about how you feel about the alternative? It sounds like they're saying that if this plan isn't approved, there's going to be a diagonal building that on average is closer to you. Is that
I don't think you can get any closer to me no matter where you put it. Because our house was built back in the early, probably 1900s, so it sits close to the road. The other section that was on that map that's marked RC is our property. We bought that. So that little section that's marked RC next to our house now belongs to us. So if the building was scooted down further towards the other way, it's not directly in front of our house as much. Where they're looking at now, we're looking at the corner of the house, dumpsters, and the back of a loading dock. If they scoot it down towards the very end on the main road down there, it's not going to be, yes, it's going to be in front of our house. Make the building smaller, you'll have more room. You don't have to make it this big. There's a lot of smaller Dollar Generals. That's an option, make a smaller Dollar General. You got more space, make a smaller one.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I would just like to
No,
read.
there's a gentleman right
Oh,
behind
I'm
you.
sorry. Go ahead.
State your name.
Ben Cooper.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm the statements you're about to make are true and correct?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
The problem I have with this drawing is it looks like it's speculation. On the drawing, it says not to scale, and there's no scale on this drawing. So I'm inclined to think that I live there in Parksville, right across by the new restaurant. If I'm looking at this drawing correctly, my driveway will be right in front of where they'll be turning the semis on this side. On the opposite side, where they talk about turning left or turning right, there's a steep incline, but also you have to see that the radius of the turn is greater to turn to the right. So it'll take a much tighter turn to bring a semi out onto that road. And it is just a one-lane road. And right now, there's not much traffic on that road as of now, very seldom. And in the future, it looks to be there'll be a lot of traffic because of this, which will cause the safety concern.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can address the drawing. The reason that it says not to scale is because it's projected on a giant screen, and there's a scale label in the upper left-hand or upper right-hand, as it's oriented now, corner of the drawing. Probably says something like 1 inch equals 30 feet. Obviously, when it's projected 6 feet tall, it's not to that scale. So that's just a warning to the viewer that, hey, you can't literally lay a ruler on the drawing. You have to use a drawing that we actually printed. But the drawing, the design is drawn in AutoCAD and is to scale and accurate, as accurate as we can possibly make it. But
I have a question for Steve. Steve. Real quick one. What would be our odds of getting, I assume that's a county road. Am I right?
Mill is county and the other two are state roads.
What would be our odds of getting the county road as designated as a one-way street?
That's not in my jurisdiction.
I
That
know.
would be the county to consider such a request. And I'm not sure, you know, I'm just, again, probably the wrong one to ask, because I'll tell you what I think, and I'm not an engineer. But there are obviously residents that live there that may have a preference one way or the other, so what I might think might be the best way to make it one way, it almost would need to be a dialogue with the county and those property owners and the dollar store to what everyone could agree, because it may be, we think one versus the other, thinking about this truck situation, and these residents may think, well, if you were to do that and they supported it, they might want it one way or the other. So I could see differing opinions, but I think it's all a possibility that the county could weigh in on this and make the actual decision on what's going to happen. I also think, to be fair to the applicant, the county could have a problem with the access in general and push them back to the drawing board and say, look, we're not sure we want that access onto our road, just like the state can do the same thing. So that's something the applicants have to work through, is getting these approvals through KDOT or the county or city if it's a city street. And at this point, that's where they're at. They could go back and get denied one or all three of these technically. Hopefully they're talking to them. That's why they're this far along. I am intrigued with talking about engineering, signage, and even hardscaping to force trucks to make one movement or the other. I think that's interesting. I think both attorneys described how we see the site functioning, but you know, an engineer could force some movements here, you know, taking this radius out or making it flow as a right-only turn. You know, you can make people go certain ways out of parking lots with aprons and mountable curbs. So that's interesting to me too. And then I think our chairman hit right on it, that trying to address, or maybe a neighbor, trying to maybe dictate something out here at not only this point, but this point, to manipulate the outcome there, I think it's intriguing to me, just from a planning, and I would put that back on the applicant to think through that options, because there could be a way that you could make it just literally no way that a truck could turn right or left, and you force that exact movement as a desired outcome. And I'm talking about curbs, signs, things that force truck traffic in a certain direction. And I think that's intriguing to me, to go back to the applicant to think through how, if that's what you're telling us they're going to do, why not force that somehow with a right-out only design, you know? So that's
Do you
what I look
think,
at.
do you think Dollar General will be amenable to that?
Sorry about that.
Yes, and that's what I was going to jump on what Steve was saying there. Something that I see to force that movement would be to, from this point where I'm trying to shakily draw, I could cut an angle out this way rather than coming in at parallel to the store, and widen the radius significantly here, just so long as it doesn't destroy our septic area, which we have addressed with the county, and they've approved that area pending a fill and wait situation. But yeah, I think that would actually further, if you want to impose that condition to force that movement and make sure that happens, then hardscaping and making that angle there would help force it, because I could make this radius, cut it down to nothing, to where it would be obvious that it's impossible to make that turn from that angle. So that is a possibility. I will say that so far we have spoken and turned in our plans to Dwayne Campbell, the county engineer, and he is reviewing them right now. And he's right; he could impose restrictions, and I think that he is the more appropriate person probably to impose those, because he's responsible for the engineering of the county roadway system. But if you do impose a directional restriction on this, then it would be, I would want to help force that in any way that I could, because I want that to, signage is great, but anything you can do to, make the movement happen as you want it, I would be amenable to doing. We're working with the State Highway Department. I haven't received feedback from them, but they've had it for a month. And as I said before, we've worked with the County Health Department for our septic. So we are trying to do this as responsibly as we can, and covering all our bases as much as we can. And I would just reiterate that no matter what you approve or deny today, the end result, most of the time that we've spent talking, is about this truck movement. That will be substantially the same, regardless of what design we go with. And there is a dimensionally compliant design that we can go to if we have to.
Okay. All right, Henry. Got a question. We can vote today,
Yes, ma'am.
or we can delay it for 30 days to see what you can work out with your directional traffic.
The applicant would request a vote today.
Okay, that's what I was gonna come up with next. Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure what might change between now and 30 days
I
from
don't
now.
see
They've
it
kind of
changing.
laid out some options that the board could adopt as conditions.
Okay.
I forgot one thing, and Henry's got those. We did have some letters submitted too. I'll just categorize the nature of those are in opposition to some level. They couldn't be here. We don't tend to bring you petitions and letters, and we tell the applicants or neighbors it's best they come to the meeting if they want to testify and be on the record. I'll let Henry take it from there. Those letters were submitted, so we did tell them we'd at least pass them around like we would a petition, but you all have to follow your counselor's advice on what weight you give those, simply because those folks could not attend today. But I forgot to mention that we did get some letters in the mail, and we stamped them, stapled them, and promised people we'd at least pass them around the desk. And I'll
It's
defer to
been
Henry
this
on
board's practice to swear in witnesses for testimony. You obviously have not had the opportunity to do that with these letter writers, but if they raise any questions or ideas that you think are relevant, you can elaborate on those by asking questions of any presenters today.
So Henry, clarify for me again what you said earlier about what we can and cannot consider with respect to safety.
I think that the discussion today has been, for the most part, confined to what you can consider. Safety is a question insofar as it is affected by granting or denying this reduction of the setback. And so, to the extent that we're talking about how that setback affects truck movement onto the property, that's something that you can consider. And again, we've heard testimony that talks about defining truck movement in such a way that it's really not affected by that corner at all. But it's, safety is an issue only insofar as will it be safe or less safe depending on granting of this variance.
We're trying to read fast, honest.
I think I understood that. And Steve, questions about sanitation or health department, and who handles questions about stormwater? And I'm guessing the sketch shows some significant grading along 34. That falls under the State Department Transportation?
Well, there's a lot of different questions there.
Yeah, there
There's
were.
different jurisdictions. Really, all the site-based elements related to septic, access, drainage, parking, are going to happen at the zoning permit level. There would have to be a
Oh,
permit,
okay.
a building permit, a zoning permit. There's drainage jurisdictions, depending on what roadway we have. There's drainage requirements under the county, stormwater requirements. All that happens at the zoning permit level. It's not something we typically do in front of the Board of Adjustments. It's more typical at the Planning Commission on a bigger case when we'd be looking at site plan review or, a subdivision plat or something of that nature. But in a variance request, we're focused on the request, as our attorney mentioned. But all those things will have to be complied with, down to the parking spaces. all the setbacks, sanitation, et cetera, all those things, the screening of the dumpsters, the landscape requirements, all those things still have to be met by way of the zoning ordinance and would be checked off at the zoning permit level.
So that's true of the maple trees as well, that's a commitment?
Yeah, we'll have a landscape, we have to look at the landscaping as part of the zoning permit. So what you see, what the applicants have provided is a pretty detailed drawing that you typically don't see at a variance request or even like the prior conditional use request. The zoning permit takes it down to the next level. Everything has to be shown so we can verify it complies with the zoning ordinance, and that requires landscaping too. Now, the plans could change if we talk back and forth about some issues, but if they have to rearrange the lot and change it, then you can see then the landscaping might change too. So this is what I would call a preliminary landscape design, because we don't exactly know the final configuration of all the pieces to this point.
I'll need those letters back, gentlemen, to put in the file here when you get through with them. Lisa, I'll have them in the file here. All right. Do I hear a motion at this time? Don't everybody speak at once.
I've got a question before we
Okay.
entertain that motion. Are we to vote on today the variance, two different variances, or only one?
Just one.
Just the one variance, the setback on the.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Motion? I'm sure Henry will help word it for us if we just tell him which way you want to go. Am I right?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay.
Everyone's quiet. I'll make a motion to accept the variance as presented with limitation on the possible redirection of the proposed road sharp turns as they were presented. Does that make sense?
And maybe add in there, and this is only with your approval, that truck movement signs as far as no entrances at some points, yeah.
Right, and any and all signage applicable to restrict that traffic flow.
Henry?
Okay. Other points of discussion during this, specifically on truck movement, we're talking about entrance onto the property only from Alum Springs and exit only via Mill Road, and that is by taking a right onto Mill Road. Is that the truck movement that you're referring to?
That's a proposed truck movement, I believe.
Okay. And you've discussed signage. There was also discussion of hardscaping. Does that
Right.
figure into your conditions at all?
That was the truck movement,
Correct.
yes.
Okay. And there was discussion of having a sign at Mill and 34, I believe, as well. Is that something that is part of your motion?
I believe there should be one there.
Okay.
If I may just request some clarification
Sure.
On that. Would it be appropriate to have the motion amended in a manner that says that the entrance shall be, as you prescribed in the exit, with all necessary hardscape improvements approved or employed by the county engineer? What we don't want to do is subvert the authority that he has over the
Oh, no.
roadways.
No, I'm fine with that.
Right. Perhaps the county engineer has some potential plans that are not before the body today, and to limit him to his engineering practice, for which we're not experts, may not be practical or desirable.
Is that okay with you?
That's the way it should be.
Okay.
Correct.
Well, and so are you, is the question about the means of guiding truck movement, or can we at least establish the direction of truck movement as Mr.
I think that's
Stevens
acceptable. I think
Okay.
that's acceptable. I think but the manner in which it is accomplished through hardscape should be done in an approved manner by the county engineer.
I think we're all fine with that.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
You got that all, Henry?
I do.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda, as soon as I find it, is the Smart Growth Workshop on November 1st. How many people attended?
Yeah, all I wanted to make sure.
Preston? Who else attended the Smart Growth Workshop?
Dan, were you there?
I was at the hospital.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to make sure I got the right folks that were at the all-day workshop to make sure I get your continuing education hours.
But if you'd like to give us the
Correct.
continuing education, because we were thinking of you.
If you were
And,
thinking about it, that's good enough.
We
No.
have the dates on here for our next meeting for 2020 in new business. But I have heard some discussion as maybe wanting to change those dates.
You want us to herd everyone out here real quick so you guys can talk about those
I
dates?
have a for, this is off the record. Has nothing to do with
It's never
that.
off. You're
Is
on.
Dollar General franchise or, is it a franchise or company owned?
I don't know. That would be a question. She
I'm
just
just
asked.
curious. Are Dollar General stores all franchised or all company owned?
They're owned by developers.
So kind of a franchise type. Just curious.
All right. So,
I've got a question relative to that too.
well, we might want to talk to them after the meeting if you guys have individual questions on that hearing being over and all, but.
We were just curious.
Yep, I understand. So the meeting schedule is in your packet. That's the last item on this agenda. We need you guys to approve the 2020 meeting schedule. It is set up typically, like every year, fourth Thursday, 10 a.m. Our bylaws are flexible enough to give you guys the ability to wiggle these around year to year. You approve them today for next year. We need to get these approved so the next filing deadlines tie into January. There has been some discussion that this might be a better day and time. It's 100% the 7-year-old's decision, what day of the month, what time. We just have to make sure we can get this room and set our annual 2020 schedule. Right now, again, this says fourth Thursday, 10 a.m. If you all thought fourth Wednesday 1, keep it on Thursday, move it to 2. We're totally open as a staff, the time 2. So it's,
David, I know, prefers Wednesdays.
Yes, Wednesdays are much better for me. The time is, at 1 is a little bit better, but that's not as important as, if we could switch the day to Wednesday, that would help me.
Jesse, any problems for you?
From one day to the next, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Me too. I mean, who knows? Preston?
No conflicts.
Mike, good?
and our
Okay.
attorney too, just Henry, is Wednesday, the fourth Wednesday a
Henry?
problem?
Well, so is planning commission the final Wednesday or the fourth?
I'm sorry, this is the third Wednesday. He's right.
Okay.
Planning Commission is the fourth Wednesday. You guys, this
Be the
is the
third, we have
third
the
Wednesday.
third Wednesday.
Third Wednesday.
Works for me.
Is that okay
That
with
works for
you?
me.
And you guys okay, 10, 1, the times?
I don't care.
Earlier the better, preferably.
What time?
Earlier the better.
Stay at the 10 o'clock
is
time?
preferred to me.
Okay, 10 o'clock.
So stay at the 10 o'clock, but go from third Thursday to third Wednesday.
If the time is available with the city.
And this is what the problem is.
If it is not,
This morning, I had the historic board met this morning. They meet at 9:30 on the third Wednesday.
then we may have to go
That's
to
why we put this one at
for
1.
that reason on a Wednesday. Is that okay with everybody if that's a conflict?
This is what happens if you move it off the day. We got other board meetings.
Right.
And the historic meets met this prior
So
morning.
it's not really available on Wednesday mornings, the third Wednesday?
They're quick. They're not in there long, but you never know about some meetings. Today took 30 minutes exactly.
Yeah, sometimes ours takes 5.
Yeah, well, ours are unique.
If 10 is better for some folks and Wednesday is good, what about the second Wednesday?
I don't know if that
Second
would work.
Wednesday doesn't
won't
work because we have
of
technical
deadlines.
review. We're back to planning commission dates. We pretty much take up all the Wednesdays except for the third one in the afternoon.
So if we can do the third Wednesday morning, great. If not, try for the third Wednesday afternoon.
It
Is
has
that
to be
good
at
with
1.
Everybody? Everybody? Is that good?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Try for Wednesday morning, but if not, Wednesday afternoon will work
Okay,
at 1.
and we'll get this.
As long as Lisa sends me a reminder.
I would like to hear a motion to adjourn. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.